Death by Alcoholism, Reuniting with Ancestors and the Journey to Explore the Afterlife, Near-Death Experience. Welcome to today's video. Have you ever wondered about the miracles that happen after we leave this world? Today, we're going to explore an incredible story about someone who faced departure due to alcohol addiction. But instead of an end, he encountered his ancestors and went on a profound journey into the afterlife. This is a deeply inspiring near-death experience, full of lessons about life, departure, and the connection with souls that came before. Let's dive into this story together, a journey that could change the way we view life and departure. James Carver was a middle-aged man living in a small coastal town, where the waves gently lapped against the white sand beaches. His life, once full of hope and dreams, slowly became dark and monotonous over the years. He had once been a young man full of energy, with a belief in a bright future, but life did not go according to his plans. The days passed, and James drowned in long, endless nights, where the dim lights and the sound of the waves crashing on the shore whispered like voices in the dark. It was during these times that he found comfort in a bottle of alcohol. Alcohol became James's only companion, the one thing that kept him alive during his darkest moments, soothing the wounds in his heart that he couldn't express in words. Each sip of alcohol felt like a warm blanket, comforting the sadness he couldn't share. But no one knew that each drop of alcohol was slowly consuming him in silence. The more he drank, the further he drifted from reality, and from himself. Once, James had a small, happy family. His wife, Maria, was the only woman he truly loved, and his son, Sam, was his greatest pride. But alcohol slowly took all of that away. Over time, Maria couldn't stand living with a man who only cared for his drink, and she left, taking their son with her. Sam, the son he promised to protect for life, now refused to see him. Each morning, James would wake up to the empty chair at the dining table, where there was no laughter from his son and the absence of his wife. His friends slowly drifted away too, unable to watch him fall deeper into the dark spiral that he had created for himself. On a stormy evening, as thick, dark clouds covered the sky and lightning flashed in sharp, cold bursts like blades of steel, James sat alone in the empty house. The house, with its dusty walls and shattered windows, seemed to have ceased living long ago, leaving only the sound of the wind howling through the cracks, echoing like the whispers of past memories. The rain fell in torrents, pounding against the windows, creating a steady, rumbling sound like a mournful refrain in the dead of night. Inside, the air was heavy and cold, as if winter had taken over every corner, creeping into every draft. James felt like a ghost, wandering in invisible spaces, amidst the wreckage of his life. His hand gripped a bottle of vodka, the only drink that could offer him even a fleeting sense of solace. For a long time, alcohol had been his companion, the only thing that made him forget the world full of pain and failure. He twisted off the cap, and a sharp smell of alcohol immediately assaulted his senses, but he didn't care. He just wanted to escape, to silence the thoughts, the feelings that were tearing apart his mind. He took a sip, feeling the numbness spread from his throat to his stomach, dulling the agony gnawing at him. The waves of intoxication began to rise, fogging his mind, making it heavy, but it still wasn't enough. He needed more. He needed to let everything sink into darkness, to make everything insignificant. Sitting numb in the dark, his eyes fixed on the empty space in front of him, James suddenly felt a sharp, intense pain in his chest. At first, it was a mild ache, just a fleeting prick, but soon, it spread fiercely, cutting into his heart like a razor-sharp blade. The pain made his heart seem to stop beating, as if everything inside him had suddenly frozen. He couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything except clutch his chest, feeling the faint, fading thumps of his heartbeat. Everything around him became blurry, the walls, the table, the house all seemed to dissolve into the haze, leaving only darkness to surround him. The world seemed to shatter, and in that moment, he couldn't tell where he was, unsure whether he was still alive or had already crossed into another realm. The pain in his chest lingered, but now, it no longer mattered. He felt a cold, intangible sensation, but one that was incredibly intense, enveloping him. It was like a bone-chilling draft, penetrating every cell, making him feel as though the air around him had become thick and freezing. Each breath became difficult, Each passing moment felt like a challenge. He felt himself being pulled, drawn into another space, a place without time, without light, as though he were stepping into an undefined world. In that space, everything around him vanished. There were no boundaries, no distinction between living and existing. He could no longer be sure if he was alive or not, only that the pain in his heart seemed irrelevant now. Instead, he felt a strange stillness, like a haunting wave carrying him away, easing every sensation, pulling him into a place from which he could never escape. As James slowly opened his eyes, he realized he was no longer in his old, familiar home. Instead, he felt his feet touching the ground, soft and plush with the feel of moss and wild grass. He looked around and found himself standing in a dense, unfamiliar forest, a place unlike anything he had ever seen before. Towering ancient trees rose up into the sky, their thick branches stretching far above, creating a canopy of green leaves that seemed unshakable by the wind. The trees spread wide, forming a natural roof that shielded the sky above him. Floating in the air were glowing orbs of light, shimmering like distant stars, casting an ethereal glow across the landscape. These lights were not harsh but gentle, soft, and mystical, as if they were a part of the very air he breathed. With every step he took, the forest seemed to come alive, with strange sounds echoing from the depths of the woods, as if unseen creatures were watching him, waiting to reveal the secrets of this strange world. A thin mist, pale and translucent, draped over everything, blurring the edges of the trees and the distant horizon, giving the whole place a dreamlike quality. The air was not cold, but it carried a strange, calming sensation, as though time itself had stopped in this place, waiting for him to explore. Everything was still, the silence profound, broken only by the quiet sound of his footsteps on the soft earth beneath. This was a realm where peace and stillness reigned, untouched by the noise of the human world, a sanctuary for wandering souls to find their way back to serenity. "Welcome, James," a warm voice echoed from behind him, carrying with it a strangely familiar feeling. James jumped, startled, and turned around, his heart racing as he wondered what was happening. When his eyes fell upon the figure before him, time seemed to stop. The man was tall, dressed in a flowing white robe, standing firm with a gentle smile on his face. His features were radiant, his eyes filled with an ocean of love and endless tranquility. A soft light seemed to surround him, making him appear as though he was a part of the very space itself. James's eyes widened in disbelief. He stepped back, then moved forward again, not fully understanding why this man looked so much like his grandfather. The shock and amazement overwhelmed him, and he hesitated before asking, his voice shaky with emotion, You are Grandpa." Grandpa smiled softly, his expression filled with kindness and warmth that only a grandfather could provide. He extended his hand toward James, a gesture that felt like an invitation to embrace him, calm and unhurried, filled with peace and love. His eyes shone with understanding, as if he knew the questions swirling in James's mind before they even formed. "Yes, James," he said in a soft yet powerful voice. "You've come here for a reason. This is not the end, but a turning point in your journey. You will come to understand many things here, things you couldn't see before." He spoke, his eyes gleaming with profound understanding, as if he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. James's heart tightened. It was as if a deep connection, one filled with memories and emotions he had long forgotten, was now awakening. His grandfather, who had passed away so many years ago, was standing right before him, smiling, as if all the pain and loss had melted away. And while James still had many questions, he knew that his grandfather would help him find the answers. James felt an unusual pull, as if an invisible force was drawing him in. The sensation was so powerful that he couldn't resist. His grandfather, with his gentle smile, calmly guided him down a foggy path, a place where the line between reality and dreams blurred. The air was thick with a soft mist, making everything feel suspended in time, as though this place existed outside of the rules of the living world. At first, the figures that appeared before James were indistinct, like ghosts rising from the depths of his memory. The first was his mother, someone he couldn't quite remember clearly, but now she stood before him with a serene expression, as if she had always been watching over him, her love endless despite her departure. Next, his father appeared, thinner than James remembered, but still radiating the warmth and protection he had given James in life. Around them were old friends, people he had laughed with, shared countless moments of joy. But now, they all stood silent, their faces unreadable, yet filled with emotion. There were no words spoken, no sounds in the air. Everything in this space was perfect in its stillness, as if time and pain had been erased from existence. Yet, when James looked into their eyes, he saw a deep sorrow, a quiet sadness that echoed through their gazes. It wasn't sorrow from their passing, but from what was left unsaid, the relationships left untended, the chances that had slipped away. He felt a strange sense of guilt, as if he himself were the source of the regret they held in their eyes. His grandfather looked at him with knowing eyes, as if he understood everything James was feeling. "You don't need to say anything, James," he said softly, his voice comforting. "They all understand. And they've all forgiven you. What have you done with your life, James?" His mother's voice came softly, but with a depth of sorrow, like a wave gently touching his soul. Each word she spoke felt like an arrow piercing his heart, making him feel a deep pain he had long tried to hide. It wasn't just her sadness, it was the pain she had witnessed as James had destroyed himself over the years. "You've missed so many precious things, so many opportunities, moments that you could have seized. All because you lived in the darkness of impermanence, in the habits that destroyed you. Alcohol has pulled you away from everything that truly matters." Every word from his mother felt like sparks touching James' wounded heart. He stood there, motionless, unable to look her in the eyes because her words were so accurate, so true to what he had done. A wave of shame washed over him, drowning all his emotions. He lowered his head, his hands tightly clasped together, not knowing what to say, unable to speak because he didn't know what to say. He felt like a failure, like someone who had missed every opportunity in life. The most important things had passed him by, and all that was left was an endless void inside him, empty and cold, like a dark room with no escape. He sighed, the sound of his breath heavy, like an invisible weight pressing down on his shoulders. He no longer had the strength to argue or make excuses, he could only voice the pain in his heart. "I don't know what to do anymore. The alcohol. The alcohol has destroyed me." James' words caught in his throat, as though he couldn't believe what he was saying. It was the truth he could no longer deny. Alcohol had taken it all, his happiness, his family, and his future. It had turned him into someone he no longer recognized, a person lost in a haze of confusion and despair. It had surrounded him, drowning him in a dark world he couldn't escape. And now, looking back, he had no idea where to begin picking up the shattered pieces of what was lost. Suddenly, another voice echoed, powerful and commanding, like thunder breaking the stillness. It was his grandfather's voice, the one James thought he would never hear again. He was the one person in the family who could make James feel any comfort, any glimmer of hope. "No, James," he said, his voice firm and resolute, as if he understood his grandson's pain more than anyone else. "Alcohol was just the thing that dragged you along. But in the end, you were the one who chose to walk that path. You decided to let it control you. But you are not those mistakes. You are still you, and you can change, you can start over. We will help you find yourself again, to find the light in the darkness." James looked up at him, his eyes filled with anticipation and hope. His grandfather's words shone like a light in the darkness surrounding him. But could he find the strength to step out of his own shadow? Could he summon the courage to face the mistakes of his past and rediscover the person he truly was? Although everything still felt unclear, the glimmer of hope in his grandfather's eyes sparked something inside James. He no longer felt lost. Like a young tree in the wind, fragile but still standing, he now had a reason to keep going. In this mystical world, James not only reunited with the loved ones he had lost but also encountered many other souls, each carrying its own story filled with sorrow and regret. These souls were people who had either given up on their own lives or destroyed themselves due to pains they could not overcome. They were like lost shadows, trapped between two worlds because they had not fulfilled their purpose or were too afraid to confront the deep wounds within their hearts. Some of these souls kept avoiding the truth, terrified of facing their own past. Among these souls, there was one in particular that James met: Lydia, a young woman whose beauty was fleeting, yet her eyes carried an unfathomable sadness. Lydia had taken her own life after suffering unbearable losses, losing loved ones, and feeling as though the entire world had turned its back on her. She stood silently beside a crystal-clear lake. The soft light reflecting from the water illuminated her face, accentuating her sorrowful beauty and the invisible scars on her soul. Her face always carried a somber expression, as if time had stopped for her, as if she remained forever stuck in that painful moment. Lydia didn't say a word. She just stood there, occasionally reaching her hand out to touch the surface of the lake, as if trying to find a moment of peace, a bit of calm in her soul, even though she knew the water couldn't provide that. The lake's reflection was still, not a ripple to be found, offering no answers to the unspoken grief. She remained there, motionless, like a ghost lost in silence, no longer wishing to continue walking, no longer having the strength to do anything. Her soul seemed to dissolve into the space around her, like a thin wisp of smoke in the light breeze, unattainable, invisible. Looking at Lydia, James couldn't help but feel a deep sense of empathy, a connection he had never known before. He understood her pain, because he had once experienced those moments when everything seemed insurmountable. He too had felt like there was no way out, like a shipwrecked soul in the middle of a storm, with no hand to pull him up. The guilt and pain Lydia carried were the same ones he had once lived with, the same ones he had suffered through during the darkest years of his life. But now, he realized that every soul, whether Lydia's or his own, had the potential to find the light again, even if it was just a faint glow, if they had the courage to face the past and open their hearts to forgiveness. However, the cost of forgiveness was time and patience, things Lydia seemed to no longer have the strength to wait for. Lydia looked at James with a gaze full of understanding. Her eyes, though carrying the weight of sorrow, held a quiet compassion, as though they had witnessed the depth of his pain and could see beyond it. She walked slowly toward him, her hands by her sides, her smile a faint shadow of the joy that once was. When she spoke, her voice was soft, yet laden with a sorrow that seemed to come from a place far deeper than words could reach, as though each word she spoke was drawn from the well of her own grief. "You've seen it, haven't you?" Lydia asked, her voice low and melancholic. "Every step you take has its reason. No matter how lost you feel, you can always find your way back." She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. "Your life isn't defined by mistakes, it's a journey of learning, of realizing that even in the darkest moments, there can still be light." Lydia wasn't just speaking of her own life, but of James's as well, of the years he had spent wandering in darkness, trapped by his own despair. Her words were like a small Lydia looked at James with a gaze full of understanding. Her eyes, though carrying the weight of sorrow, held a quiet compassion, as though they had witnessed the depth of his pain and could see beyond it. She walked slowly toward him, her hands by her sides, her smile a faint shadow of the joy that once was. When she spoke, her voice was soft, yet laden with a sorrow that seemed to come from a place far deeper than words could reach, as though each word she spoke was drawn from the well of her own grief. "You've seen it, haven't you?" Lydia asked, her voice low and melancholic. "Every step you take has its reason. No matter how lost you feel, you can always find your way back." She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. "Your life isn't defined by mistakes, it's a journey of learning, of realizing that even in the darkest moments, there can still be light." Lydia wasn't just speaking of her own life, but of James's as well, of the years he had spent wandering in darkness, trapped by his own despair. Her words were like a small beacon in the overwhelming night, a reminder that no matter how grim life seemed, hope could still sprout from the most painful of wounds. As Lydia looked at James, she didn't just see him, she saw all his mistakes, all his pain, and all the opportunities he'd missed. But most importantly, she saw in him a chance to begin again. Lydia looked at James with understanding as she began to explain the nature of the trapped souls in this mystical realm. "Souls like us," she began, her voice soft yet full of truth, "are unable to move forward because we haven't faced our past. We have unfinished business, unresolved pain, and mistakes that hold us here until we can confront them." Lydia paused for a moment, allowing the weight of her words to settle. "It's the same with you, James. Your past is not resolved, and it's your fear and regret over your mistakes that have kept you trapped in the cycle of addiction. She gestured towards a distant gate of light, where brilliant rays of energy cascaded, illuminating the space like powerful, mysterious forces. "You need to walk through that gate, James. On the other side, you'll see the map of your life," Lydia explained, her eyes filled with encouragement. As James stepped closer to the gate, a strange sensation overwhelmed him, as if he was entering an entirely new space, one he had never felt before. As he passed through the glowing gate, James immediately felt a profound shift in the surrounding atmosphere. Before him appeared a massive map, like an endless tapestry stretching out in all directions. This wasn't just any map, it was the map of his life. Points of light flickered throughout the space, marking significant moments in his life, the wrong decisions, the broken relationships, and the long, tormenting nights lost in his addiction. But there were also other points of light, missed opportunities, flickers of hope that he had failed to see. Looking at the map, James suddenly realized that it was his fears and regrets that had kept him trapped. He had been unable to see the paths ahead, the opportunities that life had offered him. He had lived in the shadow of his past, unable to break free from the mistakes he had made. But now, as he gazed upon the map, James felt the power of awareness, the realization that he could change everything if he decided to move forward instead of staying stuck in fear. James's journey led him to a small village nestled between lush green hills, where the fresh, cool air and the sweet songs of birds created a soothing melody. The village felt different from anywhere James had ever known. It was a place where time seemed to slow down, and everything had an air of serenity and calm. The small houses, crafted from wood and stone with bright red tiled roofs, gave off a sense of warmth and familiarity, as if the place was built for those seeking peace and quiet. The streets, narrow and winding, wrapped around the houses, leading him deeper into this tranquil haven. It was as if time here moved at its own pace, untouched by the rush of the outside world. As James entered the village, he could immediately sense that this was a place where souls could find peace after the storms of life. In the center of the village, a large fire was crackling, its golden flames emitting a comforting warmth. Surrounding the fire were the souls of those who had lived complete lives, those who had learned the art of love, forgiveness, and seeking meaning in life despite the challenges. They sat together, sharing stories of joy and sorrow from their pasts, and James felt a strange sensation, a feeling that he had found a place that truly belonged to him, a place where he could rest and reflect on the journey he had made. One of the elders in the group stood up and walked toward James. He was an older man, with snow-white hair, a gentle face, and eyes that seemed to contain the wisdom and love of the ages. He walked over, offering a warm smile, his hands shaking slightly but firm in inviting James to sit beside the fire. The light from the flames illuminated his face, making him look as though he were one with the nature around him. "Hello, James," he said, his voice deep and warm, filled with compassion. "You've come here for a reason. This place is for souls who have learned the power of forgiveness and love, things you can find within yourself as well, if you are open to it." James looked at him, feeling a peacefulness that was almost foreign to him. This elder, with his calm eyes, was unlike anyone he had met in his entire life. There was something in his gaze that made James feel as though he had found a true teacher, a guide who would help him see the things that he had missed along the way. James sat down next to the fire, feeling as if he had returned home after a long journey. The warmth of the fire seemed to ignite something within him, as though it was waiting to spark once again from the ashes of his past. "You know, James," Jack said, his eyes bright with a deep understanding, "life isn't always easy. It's like a long, winding road, full of challenges, hills, and moments where it feels like you just can't go on. But it's those very challenges, son, that help you truly grow. They teach you about yourself, about the world, and about what you truly value. There may be times when you feel lost, when everything seems dark and meaningless, but it's precisely in those moments that you will find the opportunity to discover the light inside you. That's part of this journey. If you learn to accept yourself, your past mistakes, the old wounds, and if you understand that forgiveness is a power, everything will slowly start to change. You'll begin to see new paths, new opportunities you never saw before, and those opportunities will open up a whole new world before your eyes." James listened intently to every word Jack said, feeling a sense of awakening within himself. Each sentence, each word from Jack felt like a gentle breeze blowing through his soul, erasing the scars he had tried so hard to hide for so many years. He felt the layers of emotion inside him gradually being peeled away, like an old, worn-out coat that was finally ready to be discarded. The mistakes, the wrong choices he had made in the past, though painful and hurtful, weren't what defined the path he was walking. They were just small pieces in a much bigger picture, a picture he could still change. He couldn't alter what had already happened, but he could fully take control of what was waiting for him ahead. This realization felt like a new burst of light, illuminating the dark corners of his soul. He understood that if there was one thing he could change, it was how he viewed himself, his past, and the things he thought were unforgivable. He felt a newfound strength, a strength not born from running away or denying old wounds, but from accepting them and learning to forgive himself. He was determined that from this moment on, he would not let those wounds control his life anymore. With each encounter, James began to realize that departure is not a dark ending, but a profound transition, a doorway into a completely new phase. The souls he met along this journey were not just ghosts of the departed, but beings who had the opportunity to reflect on their lives from a different perspective, one not influenced by fear or regret. Each soul carried its own story, filled with regrets and pain, but more importantly, acceptance and forgiveness. They had faced the suffering of their past, reflected on and learned from their mistakes, and from that, found peace within their hearts. These encounters helped James realize that departure is not the end, but a part of the eternal cycle of life and departure. A place where we can learn, heal, and be reborn. It was these souls who showed James that within all of us lies the ability to rise from wounds, to face what has passed, and continue moving forward. James began to realize that what he needed was not to run from the past, but to accept himself. Forgiveness for past mistakes was not just a gift he gave to others, but a liberation for himself. He understood that while the past couldn't be changed, the present and future offered invaluable opportunities to begin anew, to love again, and to seek meaning from lessons in life that he had forgotten. When he realized that life is not a series of mistakes but a journey that can start over at any point, he made the decision to return to the real world. He carried with him valuable lessons about forgiveness, love, and the profound meaning of life that he had once forgotten. When James slowly opened his eyes, he immediately felt the difference in his surroundings. The strong light from the hospital room shone directly into his eyes, causing him to squint uncomfortably. His head felt heavy, as if he had just woken up from a long, tiring dream. His hand still tightly gripped the bottle of water, but not out of the intense thirst for alcohol he had felt before. That craving was completely gone. He looked around, trying to recognize the room, but everything still appeared blurry, unclear. He didn't remember how he ended up here, between the stark white walls and the medical equipment beeping in the corner. However, despite not fully understanding everything, he felt a deep change within his body. The emptiness, the insatiable thirst, was no longer there. Instead, there was a strange sense of relief, as though a heavy, invisible burden had been lifted off his shoulders. The memories of his miraculous journey among the souls, of his ancestors, and the life lessons, were still fresh in his mind. They were like a bright flame, constantly shining and reminding him that he couldn't go back to the old path. He could not continue living in avoidance and drunkenness. He had missed too many precious things that life had offered, and now, he couldn't go back to start over. James sat quietly in his hospital room, the faint sunlight filtering through thick, grey clouds, casting pale streaks of light on the white walls. He gazed out the window where a gentle breeze rustled through the trees, their leaves whispering soft secrets. The fresh, cool air filtered in, bringing a sense of renewal that he hadn't felt in years. He took a deep breath, letting the air soothe the tension in both his body and soul. But it wasn't just for his own sake that he decided to step outside, it was also for the loved ones he had neglected during his years of drowning in the haze of addiction. The familiar faces he now only remembered through dimming memories, the phone calls that were never made, the words of love that were never reciprocated. He realized he had separated himself from them, living in a small world filled with emptiness. Now, he understood that in order to truly live, he needed to reconnect with them, open his heart, and embrace the love he had lost. With that determination, he began planning to reconnect with his family, but not just through brief visits or quick hugs, but through real moments, genuine conversations he had been avoiding for so long. He wanted to make amends, not with empty words, but through actions, to prove that he had changed. He began with small steps, starting with calling his mother something he had put off for so long out of guilt. He didn't know if he would receive forgiveness, but he knew it was the only way to heal the wounds he had caused, both in himself and in the people he loved. Each step on this new path was a challenge, and each day brought new struggles, but he understood this was the only way to rebuild from the ground up. Gradually, he began to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Not just with his family, but with old friends, those who had once given up on him. Now, they looked at him with different eyes, not filled with contempt or disappointment, but with empathy and hope. James became an inspiration to others struggling with addiction, sharing his story with courage and understanding, no longer hiding his past but accepting it as part of who he was, a valuable lesson learned. He helped others re-examine themselves, teaching them that while the past can never be changed, every new day offers an opportunity to start over, to make better choices for themselves and those around them. His life was no longer filled with dark days, long nights of drunkenness, and hopelessness. It was now a journey toward light, a journey toward peace within. And he knew that, although the road ahead would be long and difficult, he would never be alone, for he had reconnected with the people who mattered most in his life. Thank you all for taking the time to follow James Carver's incredible journey from passing to rebirth. We hope the message about forgiveness, rediscovering oneself, and the meaning of life will be an inspiration for all of us. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss future videos. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you on more mysterious journeys ahead.